And now we're live. What's up, party people? Happy Wednesday. Welcome back to another happy hour sponsored by Lift Apparel. Great brand, great shirts. It is a brand I created in November. Really two main intentions: spread love, support mental health. So 10% of the proceeds go to support mental health advocacy organizations. We've also got some really awesome shirts, sayings, got hats on there, sweatshirts. If that's of interest to you, I will drop a discount code in the comments of this video. You can get 10% off and support mental health at the same time. But I'm super psyched. Today, we're talking about building self-awareness. One of my there we go. All right, I closed it out. Anyways, building self-awareness, one of my favorite topics to talk about. So talk a little bit about what does that mean? What is it? Why is it important? My experience with it. And then I want to give you some activities and practices at the end that you can use to start to more effectively build your own sense of self-awareness. So when we're thinking about self-awareness, really, I see it as two distinct pieces. So part of self-awareness is understanding what is currently happening for you internally, who you currently believe yourself to be. It's almost like an awareness of what's so. So when you have an emotional reaction, understanding what is the emotion, what's going on for you internally at the time. But then I also think the other component of it is understanding why something is happening. So if you have an emotional reaction, it's being able to pinpoint, why did that thing happen? What was it about how I'm relating to this? What is it about my perspective or my mindset or my belief system that had me react in the way that I reacted? I think that self-awareness is incredibly important because your ability to enact meaningful change in your life, like your ability to actually do things for yourself, create results, create a relationship that really serves you, works with you, suits you, your ability to create a career that really works for you, that fulfills you, that pays you well. Your ability to create all of those experiences are directly related to how well you know yourself, how much agency you have internally. And all this comes down to your own sense of self-awareness. Because as you're out living your life, you're making decisions based on stories and a framework that you've developed over time. It's how you decide where to go get a job, whether or not to leave your job, when to ask for a promotion, if you ask for a promotion. It's how you decide who you want to be in a relationship with, how you approach building that relationship, repairing that relationship, whether or not to stay in that relationship. All of those decisions and all of those actions that you're taking are driven by a set of stories, a set of scripts, a set of beliefs that you have about yourself, who you believe yourself to be, your place in the world, how relationships work, how the world works. It's almost like this set of instructions that you've built over the course of your life that you now use to go out and make decisions. It's also the thing that gets in the way of you creating what you want. So if you're finding yourself craving a job that's really fulfilling, that pays you well, that's exciting, but you can't seem to get there or can't seem to create that, likely there is something about how you're relating to yourself or the world that's getting in the way, that's in your blind spot. And so the brilliance and the great thing about building self-awareness is you start to do the investigative work to understand what those instructions are. Like you actually bring awareness to, and you start to notice why you do the things that you do, how your perspective on the world is shaped, what your belief system is. All of those instructions, you start to bring awareness to how you're out making decisions and taking action. And that's really fundamentally the thing that's going to have the biggest difference, the biggest long-term difference. When you think about over the course of your life, all the relationships that you're going to build, all the experiences that you're going to have, all the roles that you'll take on at work, all the money that you'll handle, you are the central component of all of those things. And so bringing awareness to those instructions, bringing awareness to those scripts is really important, because it then gives you the opportunity to do something about it. Because most of us, most of the time, are walking around completely unconscious of why we do the things that we do. We're literally on autopilot, just going from experience, conversation to conversation, just reacting to things, reacting to people, reacting to what people have said to us. There's not a lot of agency in that. If you're on autopilot, you're not the one in the driver's seat. Your instructions and your identity and your scripts and your stories are the ones that are in the driver's seat. And they're just reacting to things. So what ends up happening is you create more of what you've already had. I know for myself, I think about when I was a kid, really like my role in my family was I was the peacekeeper. I was the mediator in my family. And so I picked up this script that the way that I was supposed to get what I wanted, attention, love, energy, affection, whatever, was to stay out of the way, stay small, be super nice and upbeat and happy, and work really hard. And that is how I would get what I wanted. And in some ways it worked. In some ways, the work hard and be nice to everybody got me results. And at the same time, it's a pretty limited strategy for going out and creating a well-rounded, intimate, connected, joyful experience. So what if I didn't want to be nice to people? What if somebody didn't deserve my niceness? It doesn't fit within that conception. And then I'm also putting my own sense of self-worth and value as a person based on how hard I'm working, or based on how nice I'm being to somebody. And so left to my own devices, if I hadn't done the work to build self-awareness and start to get clear on what those stories were, I would have just created more of the same. This is actually how a lot of us end up living. The autopilot piece that I mentioned, we grow up in a family till whatever age, until we leave. But those formative years end up becoming the basis, becoming the instructions that we follow for the rest of our lives. So the person that we become, the ideas, the stories, the scripts that we pick up when we're 6 or 7, which are very core, by the way, these are very foundational ideas about who we are and how the world works. We end up playing those out throughout the rest of our lives. And that's how most people will live their life. They grow up in a family, they get this set of instructions, they get this idea about how things are supposed to function and how it's supposed to work. And they go out and they spend their entire life just following this set of instructions. And a lot of times those instructions, those scripts are pretty disempowered. Like they're not actually loving, they're not healthy. They're the byproduct of generations of trauma and scarcity thinking and pain and abuse and not so great stuff. And so the beauty in self-awareness, and why this is something I think everyone should be actively trying to build, again, is you start to bring light to what those things are. So that instead of going out and being on autopilot, like you actually get to be in the driver's seat and bring presence to each decision and each action. So when someone would say something which would usually trigger you and cause an emotional and angry emotional reaction, and you kind of like lose yourself. If you've had that experience, somebody says something, it's a trigger, and you come to 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, a day later, and you're like, wow, like that really just kind of like took me out and had me go unconscious for a little bit because you were reacting so much. It stops that. Self-awareness stops that, because you can bring presence to that moment and you can say, hey, is this Is this how I want to be in this situation? Is this how I want to interact with this person? Is this the action that I want to take here, or the decision that I want to make? I think one of the other great parts about self-awareness is it also helps you understand your blind spots or pieces about yourself and your identity that are keeping you from what you want. So, for example, I was actually just in a conversation about this earlier today on a podcast. He asked me, what is one question that you think people should ask more often? And my answer was, I think everyone should ask themselves the question to themselves, do I fundamentally believe that I matter? And then just be with whatever the answer was. I asked myself this question, what was this, like 3 or 4 months ago, probably very recently. I was on a walk and I was thinking about this idea of people mattering, and how it's kind of interesting in this conversation around, do I believe that I matter? Similar to a conversation of like, do I believe myself to be worthy, or do I believe myself to be enough? Often we feel as though it's someone else's decision. It's someone else's decision. So it's up to somebody else to decide if I'm worthy, or if I matter, or if I'm enough for whatever it is. And the interesting piece is that that's not true, right? It's hard to digest sometimes, and we don't want to believe it. But ultimately, we are our own source of truth. So we are the person that ultimately says whether or not we matter, whether or not we're worthy, whether or not we're enough. And so it was a really profound question for me, because the first thing that popped up when I asked myself, do I believe fundamentally that I matter, was no. I don't believe that. I don't believe fundamentally that I matter. And then I asked myself, well, who decides that? I was like, well, I decide that. So if I wanted to, I could actually just decide right now in the moment that that's not the case, and that's not true. So I had to work at it. But I now believe that to be true. It's not the case that I don't believe that I matter anymore. And that's been really important and really valuable, because if you don't fundamentally believe that you matter, it's very difficult to do any of the higher tier work, so to speak, or the higher level work around creating results in your life. So for example, I'm thinking about the businesses that I'm starting, and I'm thinking about where I want to take them in terms of size, results, amount of income, that sort of stuff. And having a conversation about the level of income that I want to generate, or the amount of impact that I want to generate, is weakened. That conversation and anything that would come from that conversation is weakened, because underneath it, one of the most foundational, fundamental conversations is, do you believe that you matter? If you don't believe that you matter, everything else is like, nothing else really it matters all that much, because fundamentally you don't believe that you matter. So why would you do X, or why would you do Y, or how could you believe yourself to be worthy enough of that thing that you wanted, if you believe fundamentally that you don't matter? So in this conversation around self-awareness, that is a really important component, is you get to have those kinds of conversations with yourself. You get to look at, what are the blind spots in my own growth and development as a person, in me becoming the person that I want to become? What are the parts that are out right now, and how can I proactively and intentionally start to address them? Same thing could be said for traumas, or abuse, or fears that we have, insecurities that we have around relationships, around money, around our relationship with ourselves. Practicing self-awareness helps you understand the landscape in all of those areas, of your life, and helps you much more quickly distinguish blind spots and potential obstacles or roadblocks, and then actually address those things in a container, like therapy, like coaching, or in a self-made container, in using activities or practices that you could take on yourself to become more aware of those things and actually address those things. So that's what I would say about self-awareness. It is, in a lot of ways, it's basically your relationship with yourself, because when you start to bring more awareness to those pieces, you deepen the relationship that you have with yourself. And at least in my experience, what I find is that when I address my insecurities, when I become aware of my insecurities and fears, when I address those things head on, and when I bring this awareness to them, that in and of itself is healing. There's things to do after that, but that in and of itself, owning that, acknowledging that, being aware of it in and of itself is a very healing thing. It's a very healing process. And, I was talking about this earlier too, you talk about this idea of wisdom. And I think we could all agree that having more wisdom, being a more wise person, helps you get more of what you want more quickly. And when you think about wisdom, really all wisdom is pattern recognition. That's what wisdom is. You see patterns at a high level, and you can then use that information as wisdom to make more informed decisions and avoid potential pitfalls, avoid issues, avoid problems. The cool part about all of this, especially with wisdom, is when you are building more of your own self-awareness, what you start to understand is that your experience and how you operate is very similar to how other people operate. Like, we're so much more alike than we think that we are. And so when you start to build that self-awareness, when you start to become more aware of who you are, why you do the things that you do, all the different facets of your, internal landscape, you start to better understand other people. You start to generate more wisdom. You start to become more wise about how things operate, how people operate, how the world operates. Start to have more compassion for other people, because you start to understand, like, oh, if I'm struggling with this and I see this in other people and I didn't know any better and I'm doing the best that I can with the tools that I have, they must be doing that same thing. Makes it way easier to not judge people and have a lot more compassion for people, because you understand that everyone's just doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. And the cool part about all this in self-awareness is that it is directly under your control. It is a self-led activity in many ways. And you can put as much or as little energy as you want to into this. And it could literally be as simple as just noticing, just making noticing a practice. It's starting to step away from just spending all of your time in a reactionary, unconscious state where you're not really sure why you're doing the things that you're doing. And you're starting to proactively, intentionally pay attention to, oh, I notice that every time that I'm in a conversation with this person, this tends to happen. Or every time I'm confronted with this kind of situation, this is the thing that tends to happen. For all my people pleasers out there, one potential opportunity in looking at practices, as we're looking at practices around building self-awareness, notice every time you apologize. Just notice. So you don't have to do anything about it off the bat. Just practice noticing where you apologize. This is really powerful because it's the first step in any change, is just noticing, becoming aware of it. And what I find too is that even if we don't necessarily have the answer for how we're going to change something or how we're going to fix something, for example, apologizing a lot as a people pleaser or letting people cross our boundaries, even if we don't necessarily know in the moment how we're going to change it, noticing at the very least gets us on the path to doing something different. So notice. Self-led activities for building self-awareness. Just practice noticing. And it literally could be as simple as putting a reminder on your phone background. It could be putting a Post-it note on your computer. It could be putting a Post-it note on your bathroom mirror. It could be adding a calendar reminder. I would encourage you to look at like what's one area of yourself that you want to become more aware of, and create some sort of visual display, like a sign or a Post-it note that literally just says, notice whatever it is. Notice when you apologize. Notice when you get triggered. Notice when you let people cross your boundaries. Notice when you get tired. Just practice noticing and building that habit. Another piece of this is also journaling. Super powerful, both of those. I did I think it was last week, I did a happy hour all about journaling. And I also did a YouTube video all about how to get started with journaling. Journaling is freaking awesome. Incredible activity, process, vehicle for self-discovery and self-awareness. Because the thing about journaling too, we can only keep so much information in our brain at the same time. And the great thing about journaling is it actually gives you a medium to record information over time. And when you're trying to understand, like we talked about earlier, those instructions, those core instructions, those core beliefs, those core stories, those core scripts, you have to look at evidence over time in order to work backwards, because nobody hands you, a sheet of paper and says, hey, here are all of the underlying beliefs that you have about yourself and your life and about how the world works. Nobody just hands it to you. You have to do investigative work. You actually have to pay attention and start to ask questions and get curious about what's underneath the surface and what's driving all of those things. So that's the great part about journaling, is you can start to, over time, pay more attention and basically collect evidence and ask questions about, what is it that's driving all these pieces? Third is reading books. The great part about, I guess, living when we live now is there are a lot of people who have spent literally lifetimes writing about the human experience, and writing about personality types, and writing about how psychology works, and writing about all of these pieces. And so what I find is that a lot of times if I'm reading like a self-help or a spirituality book, is I'll read something that resonates on a very deep level that I wasn't consciously aware of it. I had never articulated it before, but I read it and I go, oh, I totally get that. I've seen that before in my life. I didn't have the words for it, or even I didn't even realize that was a thing that was happening, but you've now put words to it. And that's a value for me. That's a gift to me, because now that's become part of my own self-awareness. I'm aware of it now through reading about somebody else's experience. So reading books, especially spirituality and self-help books, are freaking phenomenal. The other piece that I would put in here, that might be a little bit more contentious, but I would put psychedelic experiences in here as well. I think that psychedelics are an incredible tool for self-discovery and building self-awareness, because in my experience, they support you in getting elevation and perspective over the way that you do things. It's almost like they help you take a step out of the lenses, or step away from the lenses that you're using to view the world and make decisions. And you get this third party, more elevated perspective, and you can start to look at it and say, do I like that? Is that how I want to see the world? Is that authentic to me? Do I want to change that? Do I want to do something about that? Unfortunately, I think a lot of it has been stigmatized. So there's a lot of fear around it. And there are definitely bad experiences. You can have a bad experience with it, but I think done in the right way, it's incredibly powerful. And I also think that even though I just used the word bad, I don't think there's any such thing as a bad trip or a bad experience. There's something to be learned in every single experience. So those are the four pieces, the self-led activity. So noticing, journaling, reading books, psychedelic experiences. The other component of what I wanted to talk about or share from a practices perspective that you can use to build more self-awareness, are looking at support systems. So it's going to be stuff like coaches, hiring a coach. Working with a coach has been super transformative for me, one of the most transformative things that I've done, because if you pick the right coach, the coach can support you in reflecting back your blind spots and reflecting back what you can't see. They're trained to do that. They're trained to be able to reflect things back without bias, without judgment, and help you understand the larger patterns that are at play in your life that are driving your decisions and driving your actions. Same thing with therapists. I'm a huge advocate for therapy. If you've never been to therapy, go to therapy. Even if you don't think that you need therapy, I think every single person could benefit from therapy. Absolutely. Because even if you're like, hey, I'm at like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 right now in terms of my experience and my relationship with myself and what I'm up to, like, you still got 2 points. Like, why not go for a 9? Why not go for, why not go for a 10 out of 10? And I think that's what therapeutic support can provide, is if it's not fixing some major trauma, it's just understanding like what are the little ways that you get in the way of what you want, and how could your life be even more fully expressed and optimized and present. You could also do the same thing with spiritual healers, if that is that's your gig. Reiki, acupuncture, other types of spiritual healers can be really great. And then also masterminds, group programs. You could do like retreats or conferences, like Landmarks, usually a pretty good place to start. But they have different kind of like coaching and personal development masterminds and group programs all over the place for a wide variety of budgets. And so there's a cool experience there, especially because you'll be in community, like you'll be around other people, and potentially form some really cool friendships and relationships. So hopefully that's helpful. I love talking about this stuff. If you couldn't tell, if you ever want to talk about it, hit me up, let me know. Love to have these conversations around personal growth, development, self-awareness. I think the final thought, or the thing that I would leave you with, is that none of this has to be complicated. It really doesn't have to be complicated. It literally could just be like implementing a journaling habit, or, hey, for the next week, I'm just going to notice every time that I apologize, unnecessarily. And I think when we're talking about in terms of years or decades, I would just have you consider the difference that investing in building self-awareness could make for you, even if it was just like a 1% difference, 2% difference every year, over the course of the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. It's compounding interest. It's the same thing as if you were to invest in the stock market, or invest, money at all, and in anything. It's the same idea. You're just doing it with your time and your energy and your attention, and you're doing it in yourself. And remember, like, you are the core thing that is driving your life, and that is creating your life. You are creating your life. And so the more that you can become aware of why you do the things that you do, and start to intentionally change the things that aren't working about your scripts and about how you relate to yourself in the world, the better. Yeah. Have a great Wednesday, y'all. Hope to see you back here next week, and talk soon.